Hey everyone, welcome to the stream. We're going to be reading The Castaway of the Flying Dutchman by Brian Jacques. Jakes, actually. Was corrected on this just recently. Chapter 4. The Flying Dutchman was now on course, cutting the coast of Germany and the Netherlands, picking up the English Channel currents. Neb had spent a happy few days. Pestros refused to leave his bunk, and lay in his cabin moaning night and day, alone in the galley. Neb cooked for all hands. The menu was not difficult to contend with: salt cod or salt pork, boiled up with whatever came to hand: cabbage, turnips, kale. Neb threw it all in a cooking pot and boiled it with salt and pepper. Now and then, to satisfy his longing for something sweet, he would pound up some of the ship's biscuit and damp it, damp it down into a paste and mix it into a bit of dried figs, apricots, and raisins. Baked up in the oven, this made a stoggy pie. There were no complaints. In fact, on the other hand, remarks that it was an improvement on the Greeks' efforts. Neb decided to call his dog Denmark. That being the courtesy from which they both came, they were marked there was a marked change in the black Labrador. Overnight, under his master's care, he had grown big and sleeker and healthier. A very intelligent dog, quiet and obedient. At a quick nod from the boy, Denmark would immediately go to his place under the table. Neb worked around the galley as long as the crew got their meals. They seldom came near the place. In the forecastle of the Flying Dutchman was a big cabin where the crew ate and slept. Ned had to go there every single day, usually in the evening. He would brew fresh coffee in a large urn that was always had to be on tap for any hands to drink, hot night or day. They were sailing through the English Channel. The white cliffs of Dover could be glimpsed from the fossil head. Crewmen coming off watch were bustling in, pale-skinned from the cold. At the urn, they guzzled down earthenware mugs of cheap coffee. It was strong and black, made from roasted acorns, chicory, and a few coffee beans. It tasted bitter, but it was a hot drink. Neb was pouring boiling water into the urn, the crew ignoring him completely because he could not talk. They treated him as a deaf and dumb and dim-witted thing that people did to anyone not the same as themselves. Neb could see their faces in the surface of the copper urn, which he had polished earlier. Though they whispered, the boy heard every word of conversation between Scraggs, Jamal, and Burness, and the Bernice Surface, whose name was Sindith. They were plotting against the captain. "You go into the cabin with a blade while he sleeps." "Oh no, not Jamal. They say the Dutchman never sleeps. Stay out of the cabin, my friend. He keeps a sharp sword there and always near at hand. If we want to finish Vanderdecker, it must be done by all of us, swiftly, out on deck. That way he can be thrown right over the side and we can sail off, eh?" Scraggs sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Ah, you're right, Sindith. And when 'tis a good and quiet, and he comes out to check the night watch before turning in, that's the best time." The scar on Cinda's face twitched. Good, me and Jamal will change watches with the two of you out there later tonight. You can hide yourself on deck. The stiletto blade gleamed as Scraggs laid it on the table. You two grab him. I'll give our captain a swift taste of this beauty, and then we'll strip that body when he's ready for that fishes. Sindeth traced his blue scar with a cracked fingernail. When the captain's gone, what then, Scraggs, my friend? One green stone is hard to split three ways. Scraggs winked at both of them. I take command. We sail here to Vespero, and I can pick up the rest of the stones. There should be plenty to go round twixt the three of them. Cinda thought about this for a moment before replying. Why can't I be captain or Jamal here? Because I'm an Englander. I look more like a Dutchie than you two ever could, and I speak the lingo. Any objections? Scragg toyed with the dangerous-looking stiletto. Watching them, Jamal smiled and patted his mate's hand. Of course not, my friend. It is a good plan. But you do have a harmless little question. What happens when we both the ship and the stones? We cannot sail back to Europe. Simple. We go up the coast north until we sight a place called Costa Rica. Anchor up there and take on fresh water and fruit. While the crew is busy doing that, we'll jump ship other side of the mountain, and then there's the Caribbean Sea. Hispaniola, Cartagena, Macabo, beyond the reach of the law, sunny climes, blue seas, golden strands, and we three be rich as kings. Think of it. We could build our own castles, own ships, employ servants, and buy slaves. There, that would do me fine. Never another cold day of life. Pestros came stumbling from the cabin that led off the main one. Conspirators nudged another and fell silent. The Greek cook clipped Neb's ear with his good hand. You could have brought me you never brought me any coffee. Get on, boy. Leave some on the table by my bunk. Obediently, Neb poured a bowl of coffee and hurried through the other cabin, with Pestros following, berating him. After all I do for you, save your life, feed you, teach you how to cook, to be a sea cook. This is how you treat Pestros. I should have left you for the fishes. Don't spill the coffee. Put it down there, not there, there. Get out of here and leave me now. Nobody wants a poor sea cook with one hand. I'm in pain night and day, with not a soul to care out here. Out! Neb retired gratefully to his galley. Sitting beneath the table with his dog, Neb stroked Denmark as he pondered his dilemma. Three crewmen were planning to murder the captain. From what Neb had seen of the Dutchman's crew, he knew they were lawless drunkards and thieves. Vanderdecker was a hard and cruel ship's master, but he was the only one on board who could keep the vessel running in an orderly and disciplined manner. Without a proper captain, the alternatives were bleak. Neb doubted that such a wayward bunch would take orders from Scraggs, nor was sure the Englander would bring them to their destination safely. Even if he did, what then? How could he warn the captain of the plot of his life? Vanderdecker, the plot on his life. Vanderdecker would that scant notice of his would take scant notice of his crew's lowliest members, a dumb mute boy. The dog watched Neb with the soft, dark eyes, as if sensing his dilemma. It licked the boy's hand and gave a low whine. Later that evening, footsteps sounded on deck. Neb nodded to Denmark, and the dog vanished beneath the table to its hideout. The boy peered around the galley door. There was Vanderdecker emerging from his cabin at the stern, coming toward him from midships were the two hands, Jamal and Sindith. The boy's stomach was in a knot of anxiety. He could feel a pounding in his chest. Somewhere between the captain and the two crewmen, Scraggs was hiding, holding a stiletto ready. A thousand things raced through Neb's brain, silly, inconsequential ideas. He dismissed them all. What could he do? The captain halted in front of Jamal and Sindith, eyeing them suspiciously. He knew the watch order. What are you two doing out here? Van Soff and Vogel are the late night watches. He caught Jamal looking over his shoulder toward the rear of the galley. Vanderdecker turned to see Scraggs, broke cover, and ran toward him. Jamal and Sindith threw themselves upon the captain from behind, grabbing him by his arms and neck. Neb saw the blade flash upward as Scraggs covered the last few strides. He could not see the captain murdered. Flinging himself out of the galley door, Neb collided with Scraggs, carried him forward, and they bowled into Vanderdecker, with Scraggs bellowing, "Hold him tight! I'll deal with the lad!" Caught between the captain and the mate, Neb gave out a mute cry as the stiletto blade arched overhead. There was a deep mumbling growl, and a black shadow flew through the air. Landing on Scragg's back, the dog Denmark sank its fangs into the mate's shoulder. As Neb went down, he grabbed the two crewmen's legs and held on tight. Vanderdecker was a tall, powerfully built man who could hold his own with any crew member. Shrugging off the two who held him, he grabbed Scragg's knife arm with both hands. The captain swung hard, whirling the murderous mate round and round. The knife clattered on the deck as Vanderdecker swung the man, both staggering across toward the rail. Then he released Scraggs. The mate's startled yell was cut short as he hit the rail and jackknifed into the sea. His head struck the side and he went under. The Flying Dutchman sailed onward to the vast Atlantic, leaving Scraggs and his dreams of riches in the depths of the English Channel. Vanderdecker smashed Jamal and Sindith into the deck with wild blows and kicks. He grabbed the stiletto and stood over the petrified man, his whole body shaking with wrath, bloodlight in his wild eyes. Neb stood by, holding on to Denmark's neck, terrified of what would happen next. Suddenly, a great sigh shook the captain's shoulders, and he grated harshly at the conspirators. On your feet, you treacherous rats! Walk in front of me to the forecastle cabin, or I'll cut your throats where you stand. You, boy, follow behind me with that dog cover my back. The remainder of the Dutchman's crew were sitting around the stove, drinking coffee or laying in their bunks and hammocks. With a loud bang, the cabin door burst open. Sindith, Jamal, Sindith and Jamal were booted roughly inside, lying flat on their faces. Looking up with a start, the crew beheld Captain Vanderdecker, with Neb and Denmark behind him. Muster all your hands now. Jump to it. There was an almighty scramble as Petros and others who had side cabins came stumbling in. An awful silence fell. the crew. They crawled under the captain's icy glare. Ramming the stiletto into his belt, he seized Jamal and Sindith, hauling them up by the hair and bellowing at them. Who else was in this with you? Tell me, or I'll throw you to the fishes, like I did with that villainous Scraggs. Jamal clasped his hands together and wept openly. There was only two of us, Captain. Scraggs made us do it. We were afraid of him. He said he'd kill us if we didn't. Sojin joined him, tears running down the blue scar channel in his face, pleading for his life. He speaks the truth, Captain. We didn't know Scraggs meant to kill you. We thought he was just going to steal the green stone. Spare us, please. We meant no real harm. Ignoring their sniveling pleas, Vanderdecker beckoned to the burly German crewman. Vogel, you are first mate now aboard my ship, and will be paid as much. Make 2 hanging nooses and throw them over the mid-cross. These criminals must pay for what they did. Vogel saluted, but did not move. He spoke hesitantly. Captain, if you execute them, it'll leave us 3 hands short. No ship this size could round Cape Horn with 3 experienced seamen missing. There was a silence, then the captain nodded. You are right, Mr. Vogel. See that they only get half rations and biscuits and water until we make harbor. They will be tried and hanged by a maritime court when we get back to Copenhagen. When they are not on duty, see that they are shackled in the chain locker. Is that clear, Mr. Vogel? The new mate saluted. Aye, Captain. He turned to Neb. Half rations and biscuits and water for the rest of the trip. Do you hear that, cook? As Neb nodded obediently, Vanderdecker turned his quizzical gaze on the boy. This lad is the cook? How so? Peterus nursed his damaged hand, whimpering, Captain, my hand is bad hurt. I could not cook with one hand. He tried to shrink away, but Vanderdecker grabbed Petros by the throat. He shook him as a terrier would a rat. The Greek's terror-stricken eyes locked by the Dutchman's icy glare. The captain's voice dropped to a wisp, a warning rasp. I signed you aboard as a cook. Your useless love of blubber. Now get to the galley and cook, or I'll roast you over your own stove. He hurled the unfortunate Petros' body from the cabin. There was danger in Vanderdecker's voice as he turned on the rest of his crew. Every man does as I say on this vessel, and nobody will disobey my orders. Understood? Averting their eyes from his piercing glare, they mumbled a code reply. Aye, aye, Captain. Neb trembled at the captain's finger singled him out. You, come here, bring the dog and stand beside me. Neb obeyed with alacrity. Then following dutifully along beside him, there was silence, and Vanderdecker's eyes roamed back and forth beneath the hooded brows. Each crewman felt their fearful authority. This boy and his dog. They will watch my back wherever I go. They will stay in my cabin guarding me from now on. Vogel, take the wheel. Patch out a new watch. When we pass the landing's end light, take her south and 1 point west. Bound for Cape Verde's Isles and out into the Atlantic. We'll take this ship round Cape Horn and up to Valparaiso in record time. The Horned Vogel, Terra del Fuego. The roughest seas On Earth, many a vessel has been smashed into splinters by waves. Storm and rocks there. Seamen's bones litter the coast, but by thunder I intend to make it in one piece. The rest of you, as master of the Flying Dutchman, I will tolerate no slacking, disobedience, or backsliding. I see the white of your rib bones beneath a lash if you ever think of crossing me. Now get about your duties. Pushing men contemptuously aside, Vanderdecker strode from the forecastle cabin with Neb and Den close in his wake. The boy was completely baffled by the turn of events, glad not to be under Petros's sadistic rule, yet apprehensive to find himself expected to be in close proximity to the captain at all the time. One other thing gnawed at his mind: Cape Horno, Cape Horn, the other strange sounding place, Terra del Fuego, the roughest seas on earth. What were they really like? A warm nose touching his hand, he remembered a warm nose touching his hand reminded him that whatever dangers he was not alone. He had a true friend, the dog. Chapter 5. After a while, Neb lost count of time. Nights and days came and went with numbing regularity. It was a world of water, with no sign of land or any horizon. Both he and the dog had been seasick. There were moments when the boy wished himself back on land. Even living in the boatswain's herring cellar seemed preferable to the high seas. As the Flying Dutchman sailed south and point west, warm waters and fair weather fell behind in the ship's wake. It grew progressively colder, windier, and harsher. The south of Atlantic's vast, heaving ocean wastes were relentless and hostile, with troughs deep as valleys and wave crests like huge hills. It took a lot of getting used to, one moment being lifted high with naught but sky around, next instant falling into perilous troughs, facing a blue wall of solid water. Having few duties to keep himself busy was very frustrating, and Neb sat with Denmark just inside the stern cabin doorway, forbidding to move until the cabin ordered it. Vanderdecker talked to himself a lot while studying charts and plotting his vessel's course. The boy could not avoid hearing most of what he said. Yesterday we passed the coast of Brazil in the southern Americas, somewhere twixt Recife and Ascension Island. I gave orders to the steersman to take point southwest. In 3 days we should pick up the currents running out from Rio del Plata, sailing then closer to the coast, but keeping well out of the Gulf of San Jorge towards Terra del Fuego and Cape Horn, the most godforsaken place on earth. Neb could not help but sunder at the tone of Vanderdecker's voice. He hugged his dog close, seeking reassurance in the familiar warmth of Denmark's glossy fur. The captain glanced across at him, setting down his quill pen. Bring food and drink, boy, and don't waste time dawdling with the hands. I need you back here. Jump to it. There were lines across the deck. Without these ropes to hold onto, a body would be swept over the side and lost forever in seconds. Neb came staggering into the galley with the dog in tow, both of them drenched in icy spray. Petros had wedged himself into a corner by the stove. His stomach wobbled as he strove to stand normally on the bucking, swaying craft. The Greek cook glared hatefully at the boy upon whom he seemed to blame all his misfortunes. You creep in here like a wet ghost. What do you want, dumb one? Neb pointed up, picked up a tray from the galley table, and conveyed a series of gestures that he had come for food and drink. With bad grace, Petros slopped out 3 bowls of some unnamed stew he had concocted, and the 3 thick ship biscuits that clacked down on the tray like pieces of wood. He waved his knife menacingly in Neb's direction. You ain't and that mangy dog get food for nothing. Get out of Petros's galley before I kick you out. He raised a foot but dropped it quickly. The black Labrador was standing beneath him, between him and the boy, its hackles up, showing tooth and fang, growling dangerously. Petros shrank back. Take that wild beast away from me. Get your own coffee and water from the crew mess. Go on, get the dog now. Get the dog out. Neb delivered the food to Vanderdecker and went off to the crew's mess bearing his tray. Jamal and Sinden had arrived in the forecastle cabin after checking and rigging. Checking the rigging. As Neb came through the door, they cast surly glances at him. Another case of malcontents blaming him for their bad luck. Though with some justifications in their case, Vogel, the German mate, was also suspicious of Neb and his dog. Talk among the crew was that the captain used them both to spy on the crew. Not wanting to lose his position as mate, Vogel elbowed Jamal and Sida aside, allowing the boy to fill 2 bowls with coffee and 1 with water for the dog. When you 2 have coffee, I'll chain you back to the anchor locker, he said to the seaman. Captain's orders. Hurry up, boy. There be cold, thirsty men waiting to get a drink. The tone of the mate's voice caused Denmark to turn and snarl. Vogel sat quite still as he was ignoring the dog, though it was obvious he was scared to move. Get the hound out of here and back to the captain's cabin. Neb nodded meekly, not wanting to upset the big German. Sindith took his turn at the coffee urn, commenting, Bad luck to have a dog on board ship, eh, Jamal? The Arab grinned wickedly. Aye, bad luck. The ship be all bad luck. Poor fortune, poor sailors. Wrong time, wrong season. To be going round Cape Horn. You know that, Mr. Bogle? The man stared at the hawk-faced Arab. Never a good time for going round Horn, no time. I know of ships that never get round, many try once, twice, for a long time. Ugh, they run out of food, starve. You'll see the bad ocean out there. Dumb boy. That is like a smooth Lake on the seas around Terra del Fuego and Cape Horn. Neb placed his drinks on the tray and maneuvered carefully out of the cabin, with Jamal's parting remarks in his ears. Ship won't run out of food if it gets caught in the seas first. We got fresh meat on board. Dog. You ever eat dog before, Mr. Vogel? No, but I hear those who have. In Kathy, China, they say the dog meat tastes fine. Ho ho ho. Neb crossed the spray wash deck with a set jaw and grim face, Denmark at his heels. Winter came howling out of the Arctic waste like a pack of rabid, raging wolves. Once the Flying Dutchman had passed the islands of Malvinas, the ocean changed totally. It was as if all the waters of the world were met in one place, boiling, foaming, and hurling ice and spewing and spume high into the air, with no pattern of tide or current, a maelstrom of maddened waves beneath the sky hewn like lead and basalt. Gales shrieked through the ship's rigging, straining every inch of canvas sail, wailing eerily through the taut rope lines until the vessel thrummed and shuddered to the very keel. Every hatch and doorway was battened tight, every movable piece of gear, approach, aboard lashed hard down. Only those that needed a sail to sail the ship stayed out on deck. The rest crouched fearfully in the fossil head cabin near, fear stunning them into silence. Petros tried to make it from the galley to the fossil cabin, but as he opened the galley door, the ship was struck by a giant wave. A great white comber. It slammed the galley door wide, dragging the cook out like a cork from a bottle, flooding inside and snuffing out the fire in the stove with one vicious hiss. When it was gone, so was the cook, the huge wave carrying his unconscious body with him into the fathomless ocean. Neb and Denmark were in the captain's cabin viewing the scene through the thick glass port in the cabin's door. He had heard a reformer in Copenhagen standing on a platform in the square, warning sinners about a tremendous sounding thing called the Armageddon. Both the boy and dog leapt backward as a mighty wave struck the door, causing it to shake and shudder. Neb clasped the Labrador close to him. Had the Flying Dutchman sailed into the Armageddon? Into Armageddon? Vanderdecker was in his element, out on the stern, none, but none, but he had realized had real steerman skill in elements such as these. He seemed to revel in it. A line wound and tied around his waist, and the wheel held him safe. He fought the wheel like a man possessed, keeping the ship on course, straight west along the rim that bordered the base of the world. Only the vessel, when the vessel rounded Cape Horn, would the course change north or up the backbone of the Americas of the Vespuccio, with the fastenings of his cloak ripped apart and the hat ripped from his head by the wind's fury. The captain bared his teeth at the storm, hair streaming out behind him like a tattered pendant, salt water mingling with icy tears, the elements squeezed from his eyes. Bow into savage wind-torn ocean, he drove the craft, roaring aloud, "Round the Horn! Lord, take us safe to Vespuccio!" As he was a skilled shipmaster and had learned all his lessons of the seas the hard way. Both the maddened seas of Terra del Fuego washed over the bones of the captains far more experienced than Van Decker, master of the Flying Dutchman. A revolver, not a revolver, a flintlock pistol. Sorry. Oh, it is a revolver. I was right. So it's a revolver and a flintlock pistol together. I'll show you guys one more time. It's kind of cool. Looks like it shoots one shot at a time. Two weeks later, and halfway back to the Malvinas Islands, the Flying Dutchman languished in the swelling rough and street anchors dragging forward and stern between backward, beaten backward from the Horn. The captain paced the decks like a prowling beast, flogging with a rope's end and berating his hands, angered at the defeat by the sea. Men were aloft, chopping at riggings and cutting loose torn sail canvas. A ship's carpenter was also there, binding crackling and broken spars with tar-coated whipping line. Neb was back as a cook, swabbing out the galleys and salvaging what he could from the food lockers. There was precious little, as some of the vegetables in sacks and casks of salted meat had been swept away when Petros was lost. One of the clean water barrels had its contents tainted by seawater. The dog dragged saturated empty sacks from behind the table, his old hiding place. Soon Neb had a fire going in the stove and a warmth beginning to return to the galley. He chopped vegetables and salted cod and made a stew and put a coffee on the brew in a big pan. It was very unusual for the captain, but he came into the galley and sat down at the table, eating his meal and drinking coffee there. Denmark stayed between the stove and the far bulkhead. The dog never really showed any inclination to be near anyone except Neb. Ignoring the animal's presence, the captain gave orders to the boy, take the food and coffee to the fossil head cabin, serve it to the hands, don't listen to what they're saying, then come back here. Oh, go on, boy. Take your dog too. Neb did as he was bidden. While he was gone, Vanderdecker sat at the galley table, the door partially open, staring out at the restless waves, thinking his own secret thoughts. After a while, Neb returned carrying an empty stew pot, with the dog trailing at his heels. Vanderdecker indicated a packing box, which served as a chair on the table. Sit there, boy, and tell me what you've heard. Neb looked perplexed. He pointed to his mouth and shrugged. The captain fixed him with a piercing stare. I know you're mute. Keep your eyes on me and listen. Now the crew are not happy, yes? I can tell they're not by the looks in their eyes. Keep looking at me. They're all talking among themselves. It's mutiny. They want to take over my ship and sail back home, am I right? Neb's eyes widened. He felt like a flightless bird in the presence of a cobra, his gaze riveted on the remorseless, pale gray eyes. The captain nodded. Of course I'm correct. Who is the one that doing the most talking, eh? Is it Vogel? No? And perhaps another Rashoff, the Austrian? No, he's too stupid. Maybe there's two spokesmen. The pair I put in chains? I'm right, aren't I? It's Jamal and Sindith. I thought I'd wager that Sindith is the one doing the most, that does the most talking. Neb sat fascinated by Vanderdecker's uncanny judgment. He did not move. The icy gray eyes held him pinned as if they were reading his mind like a book. The captain laid his short, fat musket on the table. It had 6 stubby barrels, which could discharge simultaneously at one pull of the trigger. Simultaneously, okay. A pepper pot musket, one of type often used in riots and devastating effects in close spaces. Pepper pot musket. Aye, your eyes are too honest to lie, boy. Stay here. Lock the door and admit nobody but myself. Concealing the weapon beneath his tattered cloak, the Dutchman swept out of the galley. Locking the door securely, the boy, trembling, was left with his dog. They sat staring at one another, Denmark laying his head against his young master's lap, gazing up at him with anxious eyes. Neb had no idea how long he sat thus, awaiting the report of the fearsome musket, but none came. He thought that maybe the crew had been overcome their harsh captain and thrown him overboard. The boy's eyes began to close in the galley's warmth when Denmark stood up, suddenly alert. Somebody banged on the door and a voice called out, "Open up, boy, it's your captain." Trembling with relief, Neb unbolted the door. Vanderdecker strode in and sat at the table. "Bring my logbook, quill, and ink from my cabin." Whilst he made more coffee, he listened to Vanderdecker in noting as he wrote in the captain's log. "We sail back to Cape Horn at dawn's first light. This time the Flying Dutchman will make it round the Horn. Every man will be on deck working. Tonight I quelled the mutiny among the crew. Now there's no voices raised against my command. Sindeth and a Bursny deckhand was the ringleader. He no longer has to await until we get back to Copenhagen for judgment and execution, using my authority as captain to stem the mutiny and preserve good order aboard the vessel. I summarily tried and hanged him myself." Vanderdecker glanced up from his writing at Neb's horrified face. From the first time the boy saw what appeared to be a smile on the captain's face. If you ever command a ship, which isn't very likely, always remember this, boy. Should the voyage prove risky and returns valuable, it is wise to sign up your crew from all nations. That way they lack any common bond. A disunited crew is the easiest one to control. Take my word for it. Those were the last words Vanderdecker spoke that night. He slept sitting in his chair, the pepper pot musket on the table in front of him. Neb and Denmark lay down together near the stove by the far bulkhead, watching the strange man. Red reflections from the galley stove fire illuminated his harsh features. They never once relaxed, not even in sleep. 4 days later, the Flying Dutchman was off the coast of Terra del Fuego again, and Vanderdecker, as steersman and all hands on deck striving in the depths of midwinter to round the Cape once more. It was sheer madness and folly to attempt such an undertaking at that time of year, but none dared say so. Armed with sword and musket, the captain drove his crew like slaves. Sleep was snatched in 2 short shifts, rations were reduced to half fare, men were continuously forced aloft to cut away and repair just battered rigging. Neb was on his feet the day night and day, rationing out boiling coffee, cooking the meager scraps that were the crew's diet, and battling constantly to keep the galley dry and the fire going. It was extra difficult because most hands slept there now, under the table in empty sacks in all 4 corners, catching what rest they could, until lashed out by the knotted rope end of Master Borgel, the mate. Vanderdecker Vanderdecker drove himself even harder than his crew, retiring only once briefly a night to his cold stern cabin and eating broth both little and infrequently. Neb had never imagined the sea more wild and cruel. Under the hurricane force winds, icicles formed sideways, sticking out like daggers astern. There was no lee side to anything on Cape Horn. Now and again, though, the sheeting mixture of sleet, rain, the coast could be glimpsed. Gigantic dark rocks with a nimbus of ice and spray framing them for all the world like prehistoric sea monsters waiting to devour anything that sailed too close. Close and wet became a thing that had to be lived with. Cold and wet. Some of the crew lost fingers and toes to frostbite. 2 of them on the same day fell from riggings to their death in the bedlam of freezing waves. Sometimes Neb imagined he could hear thunder in the distance, or was it just the boom of tidal-sized waves crashing upon the coastal rocks? Driven forward one day, then twice as far back the next, the ship tacked sideways and often turned completely around, sails filling or bursting, then slacking tremendously, slapping with tremendous slapping sounds. Half the cargo of iron wave was jettisoned into the sea to keep the vessel afloat. One morning Neb was recruited to be a party in the midship hold. There were groaning timbers where leaking water into the hatch space. All day he spent there, plugging away at the cracks with mallet, flat chisel, and lengths of heavy tattered tarred rope they called oakum. The boy's hands became so bruised and cracked with the cold that another crewman had to take his place. Neb fought back tears of pain as he thrust both hands into a pail of hot water on the galley stove. Denmark whined and placed his head against the boy's leg. Every Even over the melee of waves and winds and creaking timbers, Vanderdecker's voice could be heard, cursing the crew, Cape Horn, the weather, and the heaving seas that the most blood-curdling oaths with the most blood-curdling oaths and imprecations. 3 weeks later, the Flying Dutchman was in the same position, pushed back again, halfway betwixt Tierra del Fuego and the Manivas Isles, defeated for the second time by Cape Horn. Weary, sick, and half-starved, the crew lay in their forecastle cabin. Was a terrible atmosphere hanging over the place, but no longer did the men speak to one another. They stayed in their bunks or huddled alone in corners. Some had missed finger and toe joints from the frostbite. All of them, to a man, was suffering with scurvy, owing it to the lack of fresh vegetables. Teeth loosened and fell out, hair too. Sores formed around cracked lips. The two who had perished were not mourned. Their blankets, clothing, and personal effects were immediately stolen by former crewmates. Survival was the order of the day, with each man knowing his chances of staying alive were growing shorter and freezing out on the South Atlantic within the radius of the great white unknown regions of the Antarctica. Locked in the galley with his dog, Denmark, Neb could do nothing but carry out his captain's orders. He smashed up the broken rigging to free the stow fire, supplementing it with tarred rope, barrel staves, and any waste he found. Water was growing short, the coffee supply was almost negligible, food was down to bare minimum. Still, he carried out his duties as best he could. Following the alternative would be for him and the dog to move into the crew's cabin. He shuddered to think how that would end up. Vanderdecker had told him that was what his fate would be unless he obeyed orders. The captain kept to his cabin at the stern, himself showing himself only once every evening, when the day's single meal was served. Armed with pepper pot musket and sword, he would arrive at the galley with his tray and command Neb to open up. Having served himself with weakened coffee and a plate of the meager stew, he would half fill another bowl with drinking water and give Neb his usual orders. Heed me carefully, boy. I will return to my cabin now, place the pans of stew, coffee, and water out for the crew on the deck, and get back inside quickly. I'll ring the ship's bell, and they'll come and get their meal then. I'll ring the bell again in the morning, and they'll return the pans. Collect up and lock yourself in again. If they catch you with the galley door open, the scum will slay you, eat your dog, and strip the galley bare. You open the door only to me, understand? Neb, his eyes never leaving the captain, saluted in reply and set about his task. Only once did the crew member venture out onto deck for reasons other than going to the galley door. Mr. Vogel, the German mate, driven down, almost mad with hunger and cold, approached the captain's cabin. He was a big, powerfully built man, embodiment by the ship's predicament. He banged upon Vanderdecker's door. When the door did not open, he began shouting, "Captain, it is I, Vogel. You must turn the ship round. If we stay here longer, all will be lost. Captain, I beg you to listen. We're fast running out of food and water. The men are sick and weak. The ship will not stand up to these seas for long. We're going nowhere. Give the order to put back the sail. For safety, Captain. We can go anywhere. Malvinas, Salmarinas, Al Shabala. The Americans are close. There we could refit the vessel, sell the cargo remains on board, and take another cargo and sail to Anglers, Morocco, Spain, or even home to Copenhagen. Soon you will have mutiny abroad. If we sit here, Captain, you know what I say makes sense. Do it. Now, I implore you in the name of the Lord. Vanderdecker cocked his pepperpot musket. It was a clumsy but awesome weapon. One pull of the trigger could send out a fuselage of leaden shot, 6 heavy musket balls. Without opening the cabin door, he fired, and the blast killed Vogel instantly. Neb and his dog jumped back at the sound of the explosion. Reloading swiftly, the captain marched from the cabin door with sword and pistol, a menacing light in his eyes, calling out in a voice like thunder. Neb and the crew heard. Neb and the crew could not help but hear him. I am Vanderdecker, the master of the Flying Dutchman. I take orders from neither God nor man. Nothing can stop me, nothing in this world nor or the heavens above. Cower in your cabins or throw yourselves into the waters. What I need What need have I of worthless warg dogs who call themselves sailors? Sailors, I will show you a sailor, a captain. As soon as I have this ship rigged and ready, I set course for Terra del Fuego. I will take my vessel round the Horn single-handedly. Do you hear me? Single-handedly. Stand in my path, and I will slay you. Okay. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we fight our country's battles in the air, on land, and sea. First to fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor clean. We are proud to claim the title of United States Marines. Our flags unfurled to every breeze, from dawn to setting sun. We have fought in every clime and place where you could take a gun. In the snow of far-off northern lands, and in sunny tropic scenes, you will find us always on the job, the United States Marines. Here's health to you and to our corps, which we are proud to serve. In many a strife we fought for life and never lost our nerve. If the Army and the Navy ever looked on heaven's scenes, they will find the streets are guarded by United States Marines. Semper Fi, hoorah. Well, Ned has gotten himself into quite the mess, and Den is there to help him. Story's progressing nicely. I'll be back tomorrow, read 3 more chapters. I want to work my way through this book. Dear Lord, please bless everyone. Your hand of protection on our people. The holy name. Bless our troops. Amen. Emmanuel, God with us.